Hello, I'm Jamie Gallagher and welcome to this virtually social catch-up. In this week's episode we are looking at the publishing of public engagement, and we're going to be hearing from three different speakers who give us a view on what it's like to be an editor of a journal, a researcher and a public engagement professional, and their advice for getting published with your engagement.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm Steph Januchowski-Hartley, and I'm a research fellow at the Fire Lab at Swansea University. And I focus around engagement with freshwater ecosystems. And I wonder if we aren't sharing and learning with others, are we even really engaging? So here I'm thinking of the concept around publishing and working together to share about what we're doing. And today I'll share 4 relevant peer-reviewed journals for engagement and resources to connect with researchers and teachers who are like-minded about these things.
Need to unmute you there, Sophie.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry about that. So I work at the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement. I also have the privilege of co-editing Research for All, which is a journal that is co-hosted by the NCCPE and the UCL Institute of Education and published by UCL Press. And I think that absolutely it is imperative to share our work. I think our work sits in lots of different silos. So from co-produced research to patient involvement to STEM engagement or outreach. And all of those silos don't necessarily talk to one another. And as Bentley said, we don't always know where to find stuff that's relevant. I think academic publishing has one contribution to make to that, but only one, and a relatively small contribution to make to that. And I guess that Research for All was our attempt to create a space where practitioners, researchers, publics, communities, and others could share their work in a peer-reviewed way.
Hi everyone, I'm Martyn Archer. I'm a Public Engagement and Outreach Officer at Queen Mary and soon to be one of the first UK RI Stephen Hawking Fellows at Imperial College come October. So I kind of have this perspective from being a public engagement professional, but also being a physics researcher, but not necessarily a psychom or public engagement researcher. And what I want to talk about a bit is why you might consider publishing and what that might do for you personally, but also why you might not want to go down that path and what some of the current challenges are in publishing public engagement.
Thanks. So just to say, I have primarily focused on using writing as a form, mostly poetry and haiku in terms of engagement in publishing about that. So I published a paper in 2018 in Bioscience Journal about projects that we had built to bring people together using poetry to write about their science. So focused on scientists, but also working with school groups and myself and another scientist also writing about our own perspectives on conservation and science under a hashtag called Conservation Haiku. And today I wanted to talk about a few journals that I have in mind that might interest you all if you hadn't heard of them before. Starting with one that isn't necessarily open access, but you can pay to make it open access. It's Public Understanding of Science, and I found quite a few papers under this journal that I find interesting. It's not necessarily my field per se, but I hope to publish here sometime. And I wanted to highlight a few things that they say, mostly that it's a broad topic consideration. So for someone like me that works in natural sciences, I think it's useful to see what other types of research are going on in these journals, because sometimes harder sciences are published there, not necessarily natural sciences. There's also examples of engagement within the journal. So they have a focus on public engagement, collaborations of science and public participation and knowledge creation. So a lot of the words that we used in the introduction are being represented here under their typical topics. And I think Jamie will share a link that I sent through for that journal if you're interested in looking for more there. And then I thought to focus on a few more open access journals because I think that might interest a lot of you. One is a fairly new one called Geoscience Communications, and this one's open access, and also the whole review process is open and online. So you share your reviews publicly as well. I've taken part in the process, and it's a really great and very supportive publishing process. They have diverse topics as well, so from things like music and science, poetry and science. So it's very interesting diversity of topics that are going on. And their goal is to communicate to non-expert audiences. So the goal is to make these publications accessible to many different people, not just to researchers. And they're at EGU_GC on Twitter, if you're interested in finding out more. And another journal I had in mind to share today, and this is one I'm currently trying to get published in, on topics related to dams and reservoirs. It's a topic that I work on in my research, and how I actually got started in engagement and talking with people about rivers and the challenges we face with fragmentation caused by dams. But this journal is Frontiers for Young Minds. May not necessarily be where you specifically get your research published on engagement, but where you might publish some of the topics that you engage about. So the idea is children review these publications, and you get input and feedback from children about the topics that you're interested in publishing on. So young people from, say, ages 7 up to 14 might read your publication ahead of time and give you feedback, and hope to get this presented in a way that's useful for young people. And the focus is on communication of a topic in an interesting way. They have diverse ways that they do that. So it would be good to check out their website if you're interested in, particularly in engaging with younger people. And then the last resource in terms of publication I wanted to highlight is one called Consonance. It's a new poetry, art, science journal. So the idea is to publish poetry at the art, science, art, poetry interface. And this is also a link that Jamie should share, I think, online. But it's a new journal. It's got its first volume coming out on the topic of connectivity, and more will be coming out in the next few months. So if you're interested in the interface between writing and poetry and science, this is one for you, and one to share maybe your work and also your writing as well. And then the last resources I wanted to share are more about places where you might be able to meet up with like-minded folk, particularly researchers and educators who might already be publishing on engagement that you could connect with, in case you haven't run across these people before. One is the Association for Science Education. I went to one of their meetings last week, and it's super diverse group of people, teachers, researchers coming together and sharing, and public engagement professionals who aren't necessarily linked with academic institutions, all coming together and talking about public engagement, and particularly in relation to primary and secondary schools. So that's another resource that could hopefully be useful. So that's very UK focused, but another one that I've come across recently is Lifeology. If you're on Twitter, you've probably seen that they've been very active, and this is interface of science and art. The idea being to bring scientists and artists together. It's a public platform, but I think there's a great opportunity there for engagement professionals to also meet up with others there. So that's all for me. I'll leave it there and take questions.
Thanks, Jamie. I first want to talk a little bit about why we might want to publish. I mean, the obvious one is sharing good practice and learning that's come from a public engagement project, because often we feel like we have to reinvent the wheel because that sharing isn't necessarily as optimized as possible. But actually, I think it was really interesting from Steph's poll to show, the ways that we're doing that aren't necessarily always through peer-reviewed journals, and in fact, that might be better. Using social media might be the better way of connecting with public engagement professionals if that's the main audience you're after. So why should you consider peer-reviewed journals? Well, for me personally, it's more about the perceived value of that within the academy. Papers are a way that academics are judged, and they have a sort of merit to them. And therefore, for my public engagement work, if I'm putting a lot of effort in, I want to see that sort of reward that is more than just, oh, you did some engagement, which is a tick box. So a paper is a way of getting more value out of all of the effort that you put into public engagement and its evaluation. Now, That doesn't mean it's easy, though, I'm afraid. And so publishing might not be the right route for you, and there are other ways that you can share your learning. I think one of the big challenges is there isn't currently, one size fits all, this is what an engagement paper looks like. And that comes because we've got people from all different sorts of fields writing in all different sorts of ways, and we're doing evaluation in all sorts of different ways. For instance, I have a background in physics, and I had training to be able to write a science type paper. And some public engagement papers can be in that format. For instance, I've done some work in exploratory citizen science, and it's basically the same sort of paper I'd write if it was just science, but you just add an extra section to talk about the engagement and how you got to the results. So that's fine. But for instance, I don't have a huge amount of expertise in social science, particularly in the qualitative side of things. And whilst I've been on training and I've got sort of on the ground working knowledge of that sort of stuff, taking that on the ground knowledge and translating that to something that is publishable in a peer-reviewed journal, that's difficult. And the support networks aren't necessarily always there. For instance, even in my university, I can't find a friendly social scientist who would help me out to turn my engagement into something a bit more like a social science paper. So actually at the moment, I'm working on a suite of papers like that, and I'm actually having to pay a social scientist to help me write that. There are also other sorts of papers that people have published that are a bit more reflective, or just a commentary, or almost an opinion piece. So there's a real diversity of types of paper if you look at known narratives of papers, but also there are some projects just don't fit at all. I just had one accepted this week in geoscience communication. I came to try and write this thing, and I can't write this in a standard way. I had to come up with my own way of writing it that just suited that project. And, that takes time. It took me a whole month to write this thing. So you really need to think about, is this going to be valuable for you? Because it will take a lot of time and effort, and you might be able to share that learning in a different way if that's most appropriate. And I think these challenges, they're not only for the authors. I think they're challenges that the journals need to see, and also the reviewers need to be made aware of, because if we don't have in our heads what a good engagement paper looks like, that's going to colour that review process, and it might put people off from wanting to publish in the future.
Thanks. So I absolutely believe that we should be sharing our work and putting it in places where people can make use of it. And there are lots of purposes for sharing your work, and understanding the purpose for sharing your work can really help you decide if putting it into an engagement journal or an academic peer-reviewed journal is relevant. I think the different ways of sharing have different audiences, they have different agencies, they have different value to different audiences. And so it's really important to think really hard about, is the value in me publishing a paper? So I think journals are one place that we should be publishing about our work, and I wanted to specifically focus on Research for All. So why might you contribute to Research for All? Well, as Martyn said, there are quite a few reasons to contribute. One is about sharing your learning clearly. It's about exposing your work to a certain form of peer review and getting feedback, and maybe using that to improve what you're doing. It recognises your value of your work in a particular reference frame. So as Jamie said, linking into REF, or linking it into the values that other academics place on engagement. It isn't widely valued by everybody, but academic outputs can be. So if that's important, you might want to then have those academic papers to enable you to show the relevance of your work. It can reach different readers, and it can act, I believe, as a tool for culture change, changing the culture where engagement is marginalised to saying it's actually core to what doing research really looks like. And finally, I'd say you might want to publish because it becomes an easily accessed and referenced piece of work. So it's easy for others to reference your work and lead people back to it. So Research for All launched 4 years ago, and it's open access, peer-reviewed, international, and it focuses on all the processes of engaged research. As I said before, it's a partnership between UCL IOE and NCCPE, and it's published by UCL Press, and NCC and UCL put funding into the journal, so there are no process charges. You don't have to pay to write for the journal, you don't have to pay to read the journal. And at the heart of the journal is a desire to bring together those who have experience, expertise and knowledge drawn from their engagement with research. And we hoped to create a journal where practitioners, community members, researchers and others were comfortable to contribute And that includes case studies of practice, research, and landscape pieces. And together we hope that would span the breadth and the depth of engagement with research. We also hope to bring different disciplinary perspectives together. So as already mentioned, there are some really excellent other journals, like the Public Understanding of Science journal, and those journals are really rich and have great content, but they don't cover all disciplines. So there are a range of ways to get involved in Research for All. Clearly you can read it. Please do. There might be articles that are relevant to you. You can review it. Being a reviewer really helps you understand how reviewing is really difficult. It's really hard to find people to review for Research for All. We look inside and outside of the academy, but we're really struggling to find people for whom this topic is in their comfort zone. And you can contribute. So I need to tell you that we take contributions both from words, written contributions, but we also take films, poetry, the like. We haven't had many of those. We've only really had contributions that are standard articles. Your article needs to share something new. That might be new knowledge, it might be newly applied knowledge, it might be new perspectives or new context for that. We try to support our contributors. So we ask you to fill in a form, tell us a little bit about what you want to write about, and then we try and help have a dialogue about actually what's the angle that you could take. The great articles have key learning points. You know exactly where you're going and the authors know the direction of travel. They're accessibly written, and specific terminology is described clearly. They're co-produced where relevant. We get really excited when people co-produce their content, and about half of our contributions are co-produced with people inside and outside of the academy working together. It's the right length in relation to what it has to say. So don't go on and on about something. If you've said it clearly once, that's probably enough. But if you cut it too short and you don't actually bring the texture in, then we lose the value in the article. It's framed appropriately, it's clear about its context, and it's clear about the ethical considerations, and is really respectful. And it's open to change. You're open to learning from the peer reviews and making a change. Being a co-editor in Research for All has been one of the steepest learning curves of my life. It's been really, really challenging, and we've got lots of stuff wrong, and no doubt we'll get lots of stuff wrong in the future. We have made mistakes along the way, but we're learning all the time as we go, and we're hoping to become a really destination place for people wanting to reflect on their work. And if you want to experience that learning curve for yourself, then I set out a challenge to you. We have a limited number of spaces for associate editors on Research for All, people who work alongside us to help us through that editorial process, working with us to look at peer reviews and moderating some of those peer reviews and sending them back to the peer reviewers at times to ask them to moderate their language. And by doing that, we build a body of knowledge together. So if you want to join me on that journey, you want to contribute, you want to write, want to review, anything, get in contact. I'd be really willing to have a conversation with you, and let's see how we can work together.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sophie. Cut back to me now. So a couple of things on that I wanted to touch on. I asked a couple of questions while Sophie was speaking as well, and a third of the room have already read contributions for Research for All, which is really nice. So a third of you, half of you hadn't heard of it before, but hopefully that's it. We're reaching a new audience, because in here I know we have a mix of public engagement professionals and engagement practitioners, and also science communicators as well. So there's something in there for everyone. What I like about Research for All is that flexibility of format, that it's not that you need to be writing a 6-page paper that is kind of the traditional academic format. There's a flexibility in format because you're looking for the voices for the community as well. And also to say that I'm one of the associate editors for Research for All, and I've gone through a couple of articles. Some of them have been really easy processes to be involved, and it's just helping nudge people in the right direction. Others have been a little bit more involved, but as Sophie was saying, it's a huge learning experience, and I have absolutely adored being part of that publishing process, thinking critically about what other people are doing, what a good publication looks like again. And I do believe playing a little part in strengthening the contribution that it's making to the community. You're getting volunteers in the chat as well, Sophie. I was just wondering if people want to be involved either as a reviewer, an editor, a contributor, can you just let us know the best place to start that journey?
Oh, you're asking me. Yeah, so if you want to be a contributor, go to the website. It will give you an idea about what we're looking for, and there's loads of notes for authors. And there's a form that you can fill in, and then you send that form to our managing editor, Pat Gordon-Smith, and she'll send it to either me or Sandy, the other co-editor, and then we will give feedback on that. So we'll usually work with an associate editor to do that. And then if we're encouraging you to write, we'll give you some guidance about what kind of place that would be, or if you're wanting to perhaps what you're suggesting isn't quite right for Research for All, then we have a dialogue about, well, what could be right about your work for Research for All, so we can try and help you give a focus to that. We don't currently put calls out for peer reviewers. Somebody said, oh, I've never seen one, and I think, oh, we've never done one. About time we did. That's just a big wake-up call. About time we did that. So I'll be looking at that with Sandy and Pat. And I think if you want to get involved as an associated editor or as a peer reviewer, just drop me an email. And I will put you on the list. We have a kind of list of people that we've worked with before. We do a lot of research to try and find relevant people to peer review articles that come along. We use our associate editors and their networks too to try and find people. We find that lots of people that we approach who don't know us just don't say yes. Because the scope of the journal is so broad, they get really put off. It's in no one person's academic home. And as Martyn was saying earlier, you know, that you have articles that say you're talking about social science, and then do you get social science peer reviewers for that? Or do you get practitioners who have a huge amount of experience on evaluation? And those peer reviews come in very differentiated. We have a lot of disagreement between our peer reviewers about what makes a good article, and we're learning all the time about how to manage that. And the feedback we give to authors always comes through us as editors, because the thing I think about peer review is that it's not always a very kind process, and I think that we should be cultivating a place not where people get ripped to shreds just because they've said something or written something in a way that doesn't, you know, like link back to the academic literature, but actually really encouraging people to write and find their voice in this space.
So Sarah, Duncan and Hannah will be your hosts and panel next week. So please do join them and be looking at how you can use freelancers, how they can help you in your work, how you can maybe become freelance, what is freelance like, thoughts, comments and questions as ever. Join them next week. I see one vote for citizen science, which is nice that at least one other person wants them. And so if you've got other ideas, let me know. The other thing I was thinking, seeing Duncan and his little logo and his Twitter handle, I wondered if the setup of online engagement might be of interest to people. I've learned a lot. If you've been here for the past 10 weeks, you'll have noticed that the way I present has changed every single week. I've added a little extra thing. This week's extra thing is a pot plant. And I've been learning how to try and have a kind of setup that I'm happy with at home. So maybe there's another session in that. But I want to hear from you. Thoughts, ideas, comments, as ever. Let me know. Tweet me, #VertSoc, Jamie B. Gal on Twitter. Let me know what you would like to hear, and I will try and make it happen. But it's 3 o'clock, and it is time to say thank you very, very much to our panel, Steph, Sophie, and Martyn, for sharing your expertise and fantastic contributions and lots of links, which again will be at the bottom of the page. Thank you all for coming along week after week. 10 weeks. It's amazing. Coming back, joining in the chat, and making this the absolute highlight of my week. I hope to see you again in 2 weeks' time when I'll be back in the hosting seat. But all of you, come back next week and hear about the freelancing world. I will see you all again soon.